thank you for inviting me here. If we imagine a building which should express the spirit of our time today, what building would we choose? Steiner talks about the spirit of a current time as the fountainhead of all cultural happenings, especially architecture. And this goes also the other way around. It is impossible to make any cultural expression otherwise than out of this time spirit. You cannot invent a style in architecture. This is something Steiner says already in 1911, before he did any architecture. And I will first speak something about this, how to understand the time spirit, the way Steiner explains it. And then, second, I will show in some examples from my own experience as architect with my colleagues. How to search for this time spirit and how you often make mistakes and shortcomings. Is it clear enough what I say? But before that, I want to give a personal memory and share it with you. My visit, my first and only visit to Forest Row was in 1968. And this 45 years ago, I came here the same month as now. And just 2 weeks earlier, I had been granted to the architect school in Oslo. So I was extremely proud and happy to start my life. And this starting of my life should happen here on a youth conference with anthroposophists in England. And the atmosphere that time, I recall it rather vividly, and maybe strangely, many of you can recall this time. It was still the rebuilding time of Europe, and everything was getting better and more enthusiastic every year. More cities was rebuilt, more cars, more refrigerators, everything was more. And on this conference, we made some joke about this because we found this culture was so outward. It was only more and outward. But anthroposophy had the other side. Whenever I had the chance, I talked with my the friends I got on the conference about my architecture future. And then we made jokes about the current architecture at that time, which had all the right angle. And they were all built like white boxes. And we also, at that time, had a song called The White Boxes, the Little Boxes on the Hillside. I think somebody of you have heard this one. White box syndrome or culture that was used for all purpose, for churches, for dwelling houses, for schools, for everything. And everywhere, in Hong Kong, in South Africa, in Norway, in England, all the places and all the issues were in white boxes. As young architect student, I was very upset about this white box culture. And then we were agreed that with anthroposophy, we should change this. The anthroposophy was a counter movement to the white box culture. Can you understand? Counter movement. We was against it. We would fight against it. We would replace that with vivid forms and lively architecture, wholeness. Today, if you look around, there are many buildings with lively forms. There are many famous buildings. People travel from distant parts of the world to get to Bilbao to see Gary's house, which is lively, maybe organic. Many of these buildings we see today, every city build such extraordinary buildings. And if we look at them, also as anthroposophists, we have to deeply respect what they can do and the fantasy and the many-colored. This has changed in these 45 years because of anthroposophy. Was it because we decided to change it? I think anthroposophy has also a part in this change, but a small part. I think the real change happens out of a much, much bigger underlying reasons. And that the tendency of this liveliness, the tendency of this vivid architecture, which vibrant, has been there all the time, has been there while the white boxes dominated. And follow me on this, because what I have to simplify, and you have to excuse me for that, but we have talks afterwards, we can make more aspects. One important issue for this white box syndrome was the shock of the First World War, which is the Steiner time, the Goetheanum time. Have that in mind. This shock was that people tried to analyze and found out because of the nationalism this war came. And nationalism is not rational. And this led to one of the deepest changing on scientific philosophical thinking in the Western world, the logical positivism, where the rationalism should replace everything which was the feeling side of the world. And now this extreme rationalism, which appears just after the First World War, is a shock reaction to the war. I postulate this. And the image, the vision of this shock is the white box. Totally rational. This white cube is built literally by Bauhaus. I think that was in Weimar. In 1923, you will see it later. And one important architect here is Gropius, Walter Gropius. Many of you know him. And they really put out this clean piece of architecture to demonstrate the rational side of people to avoid war. And they call this style, not in Norwegian, we call it functionalism in Norwegian, but in English I think it's called the international style. And the reason why it's called international style, it's not because you build it everywhere, that was the result, but the reason was to avoid war, not to have nations. That is what actually is the time spirit, which was not the white box, but was before the white box. What was before the white box? Just before the white box, there was a broad longing and hunger and searching for new spirit in all Europe, not among anthroposophists alone, but everybody. And also this guy Gropius. They all wanted to have a new spirit, a new time. And in the Bauhaus Manifesto, the same place where they made the box in 1923, just 4 years earlier they had quite a different time spirit. And then in this, their manifesto, you will see a picture afterwards how this manifesto looks on the front page. Then you will understand. Then he says, Gropius, the ultimate aim of all creative activity is a building. By the grace of heaven, official school, and in rare moments of inspiration which transcend the will, art may unconsciously blossom from the labor of the artist's hand. Rational? He continues, the new building of the future will combine architecture, sculpture and painting in a single form. Integrate them. And will one day rise towards the heavens from the hands of 1,000,000 workers as the crystalline symbol of a new coming truth. The same guy, Gropius, 1919. They longed for the new spirit. They wanted to build, and there were many of them, the brother Tharaldsen and so on. They wanted to build cathedral of this new spirit in Central Europe, on every hill, not very unlike Goetheanum, this idea. And this is a broad chapter in modern architect history, which many of you not only know but also teach about. But some of you, for them, this is interesting. Then, to combine the arts, everybody wanted this. I mean, Wagner already in the 1870s wanted to make his Gesamtkunstwerk, altogether art piece. And Gropius, as I read from you, and everybody, like Steiner in Goetheanum, he was not the only one. And everybody wanted to see the relation between the fresh new design and the spirit and the nature. And why that is important comes in a second. Nature and spirit. And not only Steiner, everybody. And they explored the new materials. They were thrilled by concrete. I mean, Steiner is famous because he's breaking the walls and doing things, which never was done. But everybody did that. So the interesting thing in this period, we would say that the blossom period of Steiner is that he was more similar to everybody than different. And, and there were some differences, which interests me a lot. And one of them is the title of this talk. Because something you rarely find by the others are the focus on how does the time spirit express itself. You find it by Steiner. And then you find this expression to have the boundary, which is not the boundary. The wall, which is not the wall. At that time, that was not something which you could find. If you seek, you see all the other things, but this you don't see. Today, you see it. Everywhere. I will say something about that. I go back to this 1911, where I started. There was a lecture which Steiner held in Berlin, December 1911. And this lecture gives a clue to understanding actually all what he does later as architect. And that is this, that everything appearing in culture is an expression of the inner life. And this is so fundamental in what we talk about now, and also in anthroposophy and in the world. And Peter van der Ree has written a book with that title. Almost, yeah, which is a wonderful survey into this question. And this has to do with when now he says that this is about the trespassing borders, going over borders, which is an essence of our time. The crossing of thresholds, which is a word which has a deep meaning in many of our connections. This meeting something, and then you realize there is a continuation. You can penetrate. And this is, you have the wall, that is not a wall. And this paradox, this lecture is built on this paradox. Beautiful lecture. And this is actually also weaving through the whole anthroposophy. This paradox is weaving through our modern time today. Let me give just an outline of the lecture. He goes through the history of the temple building of man, Steiner, in this lecture. And he recalls the Babylon, Assyrian temple, the Egypt temple, the Greek temple, and the medieval temple. And he makes these huge steps to point out something, what comes afterwards. He says about the Babylonian temple that if you study that and look at it, experience it, then you have the feeling that this temple is for somebody, is for a man lying on the ground, straightens himself up. Then that temple is a nice temple. This is how Steiner says it. In Greek, you have the sense of harmony and balance. And this makes that man get the feeling, the sense of feeling, that he's enclosed in himself by this harmony. Rising up, then enclosed in himself. Then in the vaults of the medieval church, the man who was enclosed in himself looks up. And then Steiner used this phrase, the temple, it is man. And that is interesting because he makes blur actually the distinction between the building and the experiencer of the building. Can you see? So it's a blending together, which is actually something which is not easy to explain, but it's rather easy to understand because this is something of our time today, and it has to do with what I talk about. Then, our time. That is the time where the soul rises to the spirit and receives the spirit. Now comes something. I quote, "This is what it is about in our time. It is a beginning of a temple art that will speak out loudly to the future man. The temple, it is man who receives the spirit in his soul." Then this has to find an artistic expression. And then it says, he follows steps by step. First, something infused into the temple. Then it roots in the temple. Then it turns upward from this being in the temple. And then the contemporary today, where this ever more strives, quote here, to break through in such a way that the enclosure itself, the space limit, seems to be penetrated into itself, thus transcending beyond the limitations of the enclosed space into the weaving of the eternal universe. (1911). Not yet started to build. This issue of a temple, which really can be understood, the notion of temple, the concept, that is Steiner quote, but I mean, it can be understood in different ways. And it's important that Steiner, later in 1924, after the Christmas meeting, then he's rather clear about not calling this building, which later appears, which after 1911 appears, but has appeared when he speaks in 1924. And he says, when he puts the Goetheanum, or the Goetheanum, in the line of sequence of the temples of humanity, he says, Goetheanum should not be considered a temple. In the Goetheanum, what, quote, one could sense with an artistic devotion that anthroposophy is not a religious body. Its given style is neither suited to a church nor to a temple. And to those going through the main entrance, the whole building will speak out in an artistic manner, acknowledge the true entity. Thus the building should be given definite form as the hearth of knowledge, not as a temple. This issue, we can come back to that. That's not so central here. The central here is this, the border which is not that tight. The wall which is not the wall. That is weaving through this lecture. And then he says this interesting thing, that you cannot just do this and invent that and introduce it as a style. Steiner says this. Because a style, a true architecture expression can never be invented. One wants to add, can never be copied. It has to rise out from the common spirit of a given cycle of humanity. Now, 1911. When Steiner speaks this, then he has an audience. And this audience, they had people around, and how was the common spirit among them then? Because Steiner says this, what about them? I want to say something about the common spirit 100 years ago, which was very much, you know it, so we just do bing, 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 that we get the direction of the thinking, because we want to change the direction afterwards. And the bing, bing is like this. People were very occupied by the history, the tradition. I mean, in architecture, Vienna, Budapest, Paris, the big cities, Berlin, they were like museums. In London you have the Parliament. I mean, this is not Gothic, it's neo-Gothic, it's neo-everything. They celebrated the huge humanity periods and then put up these rather new examples to show we can also do like they did. That was one thing. But in the mind of people, you really had a different mind. And just to have this example, when he speaks in Berlin to this audience, all the women, and most of them were women, at least they were in majority, had not the right to vote. Even in England, when he gave his lecture in 11, the vote right came, I think, in 1918 or something, just after the World War. 15 or 50. Anyway, they could not vote, the women. As a token of what time we talk about. You had the spirit and matter. If you go on a bus today and start to argue with somebody about that, they say, huh? But at that time, people were really vigorously, fighting. I'm a spiritual and I'm materialist. They really had these things. And one could say, Steiner puts it like this in his Philosophy of Freedom. No, in his Rätsel der Philosophie.
Riddles of philosophy.
Yeah, and then it describes how Einstein enters on this stage. And through Einstein's theory of relativity, 1905 and I think 16 or something, there were some of them. Then you first enter into the mainstream with the notion that the distinction between matter and spirit is actually not quite, the wall between them is not quite there. Can you see? Same thing. This is Einstein. And I mean, Einstein was maybe before the others, like Steiner's in some ways also. So that was at that time they were discussing. And then you had so-called proletarians and capitalists. Who talks about that today? But at that time it led to the Russian Revolution and things. I mean, that was really something going on. The clash between classes. Yeah. So that was a time where you had men, women, and so on. Then, through these 100 years, from 1911 till today, there is a really important process has been going on. And I just jump now into Pink Floyd, 1980. And many of you know that there is this film, this movie, which is built on this rock music, which is called The Wall by Pink Floyd. And this is interesting because The Wall, that movie became an icon in the popular culture of I would say the world at that time. And this movie takes up the same theme. This movie, the youth rebellion against authority. I mean, we had it going already for quite a while, but that is, I focus it in this movie now. That is one thing, and then they also had the rock music in itself was an expression of emancipation. They had the experimenting with the drugs, and the whole thing also discussed and showed how the war was not a good thing. So the movie comes out and becomes part of everybody's culture and popular part, main part of everybody's culture. We have this expression, and this movie makes the picture of a wall which is built, and then in the end of the movie this wall is destructed. That is, can you see the image? And today, our world is characterized by quite a different mood in many of these aspects. You have in art, one thing in art, you have the postmodernism, I would call it the post-wallism, could also say. But that is, of course, a bit ridiculous and superficial. But you see, there is very many of the same issues happening in art. In popular art, which interests me a lot, like this, the Pink Floyd movie. And then you have like the Lord of the Rings and the Matrix movies, and like Avatar is really a blossom in this world. An Avatar, a movie which shows a culture, which is a strange culture on another planet. And they have the wholeness as their image. And they are the enemy in the beginning of the movie. And they have the equality among everybody. And there is the harmony. That is really this world. And during the film, the point of sympathy changes from our way of thinking to their way of thinking. And that is the point of this movie. So it is easy within 1 hour in such a movie just to take this, there is no wall position. So, the spirit of today has many resemblances to what Steiner describes in 1911. Not the same, but many resemblances. First I give you 10 pictures from what I have told you. And then I give you some more pictures about what I have not told you. Is that a good deal? Yeah?
That's a good deal.
Okay. In 1907, 4 years before 1911, Steiner starts this journey into exploring the art and the architecture by doing this one. He makes in Munich, he is the General Secretary for the Theosophic Society in Germany, and he makes in Munich a meeting for the whole bunch of theosophists in the world. And for the first time, when the people assemble in Munich for this meeting, they come into a room, and Steiner had changed the room. He made the walls red by some cloth. But the importance is he made it red. And this red wall from 1907 is the beginning of this story. Because the wall which is not a wall is a wall because it's physical and spiritual at the same time. Physical is this wall because it encloses this meeting of people. And spiritual because it should undermine, it should give a help for the inner awareness of what was going on in the conference. But this wall issue was not limited to just make the walls red. Here is the meeting. Now you have to imagine these walls are the red walls. And he also had columns put in here. He also had paintings, symbols. And in the front here you had the German thinkers Schelling, Fichte, Hegel as physical points to waken up to the most clear and transparent thinking which was possible. So everything in this room, and what I mentioned now is the outer side, everything was there to give from the outer side the impulse for the inner striving on the meeting. And now I quote the other from the lecture, let the soul rise to the spirit and receive the spirit. And the point is that these are not seen separated. They are seen as one. They are seen interweaving in each other. The outer arrangement of the room and the inner arrangement of what was going on. And that is the real Rosicrucian impulse which Steiner gives to the modern mystic movement in Munich in 1907. And this is so important that the outer and the inner comes together, that even his autobiography stops there. He writes it like 20 years later, 18 years later. But he says from now on it's just one, so he doesn't need to write his autobiography anymore. Now, just to see how dramatic this is. That is, imagine that, huh? You come into a room and you come from this street. This is Berlin, 1901. Can you see? Like pastry, and it's not even strange. It's really different to our time, you know. And here is a render drawing not made by him, not made by Steiner, but made by his assistants. But what they have done is, in early sketch before Goetheanum, this is Johannesbau in Munich, and they have rendered in his drawing. Can you see this vibrant cosmos, which is here? It is so like the damp of the vapor. Then later here you see these forces of cosmos visualized artistically. This is from first Goetheanum, and this is exactly the same time. Anybody knows who? Everybody. This is Gropius. This is the manifesto, 1919, for Bauhaus. Lionel Feininger has made this drawing. And here you see the spiritual, this really pulse with the universe. Otherwise, it has no meaning. And just 4 years later, this is the prototype, the white box, and it just goes on. And this could be taken anywhere. This could be Hong Kong. This really could be Norway or Brazil. This is East Berlin, and this is the summer after I was here at Forest Row the first time. So this is what we talked about. And this is a very famous building made parallel to the Pink Floyd. The construction of a metaphoric wall and then the destruction of it, which you can read in Google about Pink Floyd's The Wall. And this is what the architects does. Huh? Do you understand this meaning of the time spirit? And this is in America. The SITE company of architects make this, and it becomes famous 1974. And then this is 3 years ago, Las Vegas, Gehry, his brain center, and here you really can feel walls are maybe not walls anymore. And you can also have this feeling, one more step and use is not useful anymore either. But then you have this guy, and that is a company called Snøhetta. That is the name of a mountain in Norway. And I know these guys. They are. I have the fortune to know these guys. Excuse me, because they are really among the 10 most influential architect offices in the world. They make the Ground Zero Museum in Manhattan and blah, blah, blah. And now, 2 years ago, they make this rather small cottage in the high mountain where nobody goes in Norway. And now everybody goes there because they love it, you know. And this cottage is really only for observing the nature. And if it is really stormy, you can seek shelter. Look at that one. And now, I read the Steiner text. I just want you to put your brain parts together like I enjoy to do, which is not meant for this one. He says in 1911, breaking through the wall in such a way that the enclosure itself, the space limit, seems to be penetrating into itself and thus transcending beyond the limitations of the enclosed space into the weaving of the eternal universe. Steiner has slightly, or maybe also essentially, other things in mind when he says it. But the text has some connection. And that is the original wall. the wall. And when we have that, this topic will be treated other places on this conference, so I just show that because that is important. I want to show you from my examples with my colleagues in Norway how we have been working these 40 years. And the reason why I do that is not to show you good architecture. It is to show you how the chasing of the time spirit has led to many strange things. And I prefer rather to do that than to talk very theoretically about it, because the question is how to deal with this. And this is only one, of course, but one I know very well, and therefore I want to share it with you. Experience and way to try to go into it. And I start with my diploma work, which I did together with a fabulous Norwegian architect called Jan Arve Andersen, who was my mate when we did the diploma. And this is in a Norwegian city called Trondheim. We have this diploma. Imagine 1974. We have the site building I showed you, and the Pink Floyd atmosphere. The box world is really dominating. And we were warned when on the architect school to do this. We might fail. Because this is really not possible to do. I mean, today, come on, what is that? But at that time it was. So we wanted to make this, and we said, okay, we wanted new culture, we wanted the new liveliness. We had this influence. This is Ogilvy and Seifert, who made this fantastic Waldorf school in Bochum in Germany. We traveled in all the summer vacations. We traveled and we studied, and we slept outside in the rain, in the tents, and we enjoyed to see what they have been doing, because they made this new culture, the counter culture against the boxes. This is in the box time, and look at that one. I mean, this even today, it's so genius, it's so subtle, and so simple and complex at the same time. So this is really a wall, and we admired it. But then we got the feeling after that, when we should become architects, there is something not quite sharp here, not quite clear, because we make some sort of sculpture, and then we have some sort of functional, rational world. And they meet, and the meeting is not very clear. That was a problem we saw in this type of architecture. So now we make our first building. Actually, it's number 2, but we call it the number first, because it's the first where we really did it. And that was a kindergarten. And this one in Bergen. And this is now, should be very simple. This should just be a plain roof. We needed to turn it. That's why it is curved. But it's a simple curve. But what we really addressed was the wall. That was for us all we wanted. So now we started to do 6 different, thick and width, everything. To celebrate this. A wall is very interesting, And people said, come on, what are you doing, at that time. And even when we painted, we were there and was careful that they should not paint the gray hair, only on the top as the last layer. So that, that when you go, it should shiver, we celebrated it. Then, inside, we made the lasur. And we had Fritz Fuchs from Järna to come there. And the lasur we experimented in all ways. And if you see on top to the left, the inside of the roof is the same as outside. We were happy. There is some clearance here, because we were chasing, we did not have this word at that time, that we chased the wall, which is not a wall. No, not at all. That is only 2 weeks ago that I found out what I will tell you now. But this is how it goes on. And then we made many kindergartens and some schools at that time. And everywhere we had different people and experimented with the lasur. And Fritz is doing also, he's almost the last nights did not sleep because of lasur, because it takes time and it takes love. And it's very interesting. But it is a world for itself. And suddenly we enter into the mainstream in the Norwegian architecture. So when the Norwegian Architect magazine, they want to have an issue about kindergartens, then they enjoy the colors of the Waldorf kindergartens. That is interesting. And here, where we came to the ground, that is the world where the children lives. They go this high, right? And the discussions we had with the carpenters not to cut it You understand how you could cut that? And then but when they first came into it, they were so happy. When they saw us, they started to laugh and smile and say, come and look. That it is not regular. We also put, where the rain come, we went there and put all these mosaics. And that was done by the architects in the weekends. We got there, and this is like 2 people, 3 weekends, because it takes enormous much time, and we found and we asked the parents to get, then we made mosaic because we had this guy, Gaudi. And in Barcelona, we had learned that when architecture speaks to people in the right way, the people speak back. So we wanted the same, this is extraordinary. And the entrances was a special place. From the outside to the inside, that is where the children really spend half the day just getting in, and then half the day getting out again. So we wanted to make a lot out of that. But then we had these traditional things, because now we also wanted to, in this entrance, make this celebration, but how could we also escape the so-called German design, which was not bad, but which was not the one we wanted in Norway. So now we go to the medieval things and we take this inspiration. We had that in our churches and houses in Norway, but it should not only be historical. So we also have this influence. We study Escher, and we find it, extremely interesting. That is really the time spirit, this going. And that has also some notion of yin-yang, can you see? You just simplify that, and then you have yin-yang. No problem, and that is also the morning verse in the Waldorf school. Look out in the world, look inside the soul. I mean, this is, everything is there. And you can just do like this, look out, look in. So we had extremely much time in doing very little, And then even in the Waldorf school, in the 12th grade, they bunk, made it. So everything was like perfect. We made the counterculture. And on the top, we had this guy, That is a story for itself. I don't mention that. But we wanted to celebrate, So now, we live in the country of snakes and dragons. That is a state church. Can you see? Snakes and dragons, to keep everything bad away. We wanted to do the same, but in our way, in modern, and not German, but for the children, And then comes up this way. Can you see? Just the time spirit. When it was built, it became famous. And that would never happen today. I mentioned that. But it was twice, one small and one big program in Norwegian television. Just about this kindergarten. And it was Austrian television came there, and German television came and stayed like 4 days. So that it was extremely what happened because of this. But before that, all the neighbors in the area hated it, because they would say, if this comes, it's so ugly, so strange. So they did all they could to stop it. And by one occasion, I had to meet the governor of the district. And that, because the complaint, and then according to the Democrat, you can meet him 10 minutes. So I met him. The democracy in Norway, we have to. And then he should decide if he would let it go or not go. And then, of course, the lawyers do the work. The governor does not do the work. But the lawyer was late for the meeting, and a short meeting. Then the governor said, I think we have to do it ourselves. And then he opened the file for the first time in his life. He has never seen it, And then he sees this picture, and, this rather old gentleman looking at that. And then he was so puzzled, so set out. And then he looked at me and he said, I have to be honest. And he was really irritated. He said, this looks childish. And I managed not to say anything. And he looked down on it. Then he looked out the window. He looked once more, and then he looked at me, and then he laughed. And then the meeting was done. I mean, the lawyer had already said, okay. And this is for the time. I mean, today such things doesn't happen. The parents had the lawyers, the best lawyers in the city, to stop it. And it took maybe almost 2 years, just to do the paperwork with the lawyers to get it up before we started to build. And in the highest meeting, when we had the best lawyer and all the parents from the school and everybody, then the lawyer said, he stood up and said, I am against this thing and I will win because I'm the best lawyer of this city. And I don't know anything about architecture. I know everything about law. But about architecture, one thing I know, that windows shall be on a line. Isn't that funny? So there you see how far the time goes. And then even this, we had Charles Jenks, whom some of you may know. He came to Bergen, and because of this suddenly the people in Bergen started to like the building, and even the neighbors later now, they come and laugh and smile. And he came there and he liked it. And then we said, oops, something is going on. Because he was happy, and then we said, why is he happy? Postmodernism. He is the writer who introduced the postmodernism. And that is the superficial storytelling in architecture. So we had a problem. We said, we have done something and people are rather happy, but we have been superficial. How can we get further? Then we make another experiment. Then we make parallel to this one, but the thinking goes on. Then we make this summer house nearby Bergen. And this summer house is where we really focus on the wall. And now we say, no rubbish, not all this. Now we just make really the wall. Let the wall be arranged by the inside and the outside forces, like this. If you don't do anything, then you have this thing. And now it starts from inside and from outside. And actually outside in the summer house, where you have the not wind. What do you call that in English? Where the shelter. The shelter, and where you can sit in the sunshine in Scandinavia is very important. So that shaped now the in and out. But I'm not representing these projects for you. I think you understand that. I just followed this one thin theme. And then we just had the cone. And then we just cut the cone according to this sun place and shelter places. And then suddenly we had something, very funny. But this something, we said okay. And the people who lived there, they said wonderful. But then we said, actually, we did not do very much. This was just to let it happen. So that cannot be what we are really doing. In a summer house, okay, but this is actually just a nature thing. This is a creature living in nature, not having any ambition of changing the world, It's very humble and nice down there. So, next step. How can we introduce some energy into the whole thing? This house is a house where you had the teacher, the designer, very energetic people, very nice people, and they wanted this house in the rain city of Bergen. So you have the umbrella motif going on. They have this cozy family, the 2 children, this huge white dog, and these people. How can they really be there in the center, and then we let the world spiral around them? We want this wall to activate and show their possible life. This is Gropius, 1923. I found it also 2 weeks ago, but it's apparently the same program. And even the same layout with the house in the middle. But here, when you come to the end, it stops. It does not have no ambition to go further. We had ambition. We wanted to make this, this spiral in the universe out of this small house. And how do we do that? Now we tried this one. We took the roof and we twisted it 4 degrees. 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 degrees. That looks like this, Even we took the motif. How can you do it simple and have the motif and still say hello to the visitors, But can you see up in the left corner? This picture is not quite fair, but Up in the left corner, which you not can see, I can tell you, there you can see this oop, which you have oop in each corner, which when you look at it, when we go in there, we have to do like this and ask people to look up and they say, oh, interesting, and then that's it. I mean, come on, how much energy do you put in and you have no result? So we would say, this is a rather shortcoming. We try, but this is not how you do it. This is an early sketch, and here you have an interesting motif going. That is interesting. Now, this circle had to come to an, but it was never built. But if you look at that, that is a double curve. So, we made a double curve. And now this is an eurythmy house in Bergen. We talk about the house part to the right. That consists of 4 double curved, too big on the top and too small on the bottom. Hyperbolic, parabolic, is it called? Shapes. And this is, the carpenters were very interested. It was a lot of thinking, but, and it's wonderful. This room is really beautiful for eurythmy. And then down below you have it straight so that you can orientate, which is also important in eurythmy. But a bit failure also, because how do you do openings in such a thing? These things, they don't want to have windows. So we went modest to the corners, but we really felt there is something here which has to be improved. So we make this one. This is a school in Stavanger. And here we have for the first time the feeling, this roof wall is actually there and not quite. That functions. And the interesting was that now we don't do shapes as sculptures on the roof to make it. And we did definitely not make it on the surface like decorations. Now it was the structural element itself which made the job. And now this structure, now is it wall? Is it roof? Alone this sentence is almost playing with our main sentence. Huh? Is it wall or is it roof? You know? And you also have this rather satisfying when you have this wing feeling. Also when you look in, you have this inside and outside is really playing together. This was actually not meant for eurythmy, but they had to rearrange, and then they use it for eurythmy, and that works very good. But here you have this roof, which is rather in balance. They are not. I have been teaching their art history, the 12th grade, this 2-3 weeks of architecture, and to test the room, and it functions well. And they are happy for it, and these roof surfaces are rather in balance. But when you come to the outside, you have this strange convexity, which gives some awareness of the surrounding, which is one part of a school. And then you see, which is not built in the middle, you have the assembly hall, which is opposite. Then you have the inside. So you have these 2 motifs, and then the intermediate motif of these double curved roofs, which is a rather simple story, but it makes a rather complex altogether also, which I will come back to. Because at this time, another motif appears on the stage. And that is the motif of sustainability. Because that has to do with our theme. This is another Waldorf school in Bergen, and here it is 10 years later. We are almost around 1998, 97, 98. Here the wall is split, and the reason is to make actually many things, but one important thing is to make it the solar energy, to take it in, preheat it, the air, and take it into the rooms. There is also another reason. You see it on the top, where the person is inside the wall. And this room is also beloved for the children. And the parents got very interested and enthusiastic, and then they gave money for this. So the small money grew by being more courageous. And here down to the left you see it. And here now we have the solar panels introduced into that. But this is the model, this is not built. Because if you see down here, it's beginning. And it starts small, like everything. But that is typical school, you know. They want to be small in the beginning, and we like it. But then we want them to be bigger. And the unfortunate was that last winter it was a storm. And this storm took away most of them. So now this summer, now these days when we are here, they are replanting. You see it on the left there. Now, that school put the last, this is the last I show you now, the last question. Can it be done simpler? Do you need really to have so many small stories to make it interesting? And how can you make the dynamic? By the sequence of parts of a building. And this is a conference center planned, not built, in Järna, the Center for Anthroposophists in Sweden. It should contain conference center with hotel rooms, restaurant, black box theater, and these things. The idea here is to let the story in a rather big, the footprint here is 1,800 square meter. So it's not a small building anymore. And how can that be done in a reasonable way and still keep this motive which we talk about? And the story is simple. It is the vertical and how it mediates over to the horizontal. And that is a fundamental theme which you have during your day and night. And you have it from birth, you have it everywhere. That is actually also what Steiner talks about in Munich. The inner side, and then he introduced that the modern mystic should also be dealing with the outer world, weaving together as one. This is the motive in this form, shape, how to bring them together. And in the end, there is also some double curved, and this double curved also consists of this green wall. And of course, here you also have the massive wood and this preheating, which is not interesting now. The interesting is that this is an attempt to follow this theme into a bigger size. And then what is happening out of life, not planned, is that Snøhetta, this office, which I showed you from the mountains, this small thing which is so wonderful, they have got the commission to make a suggestion just 100 meters beside this for an art exhibition museum. And in the last couple of months, I have been to 3 workshops with them. How now to combine things. And as I think most of you know, the area we talk about is the area where A.B. Asmussen made his famous buildings during the 70s and 80s in this important time, and put this place on the architectural map of modern architecture. So it is a very intriguing and interesting place now where different attempts meet. I have tried to say something about this term, the overall spirit of our time, and how Steiner expresses this in the artistic words, the wall which is not a wall. And that this is actually the outward image of the soul rises to the spirit, receives the spirit. And I will not say that this is an understanding which is widespread in our culture today, no. But I would say that there is tendencies and resemblances which goes this way. And therefore I would say I have tried to show you in the mainstream culture and some examples also from the popular culture that this is the case. And 2 years ago it was this exhibition in Germany about contemporary art, where Steiner was, I think it's called, juxtapositioned to 17 of the famous artists today. Anish Kapoor, Joseph Beuys.
The alchemy of everyday. The alchemy des Alltags was the exhibition. In Wolfsburg on the Friedhof Museum.
Yeah, no, but that is another one. That is his, and then you have both. You also have the contemporary, yes. And this is a token how the ideas of Steiner in art is taken into the real mainstream. And I mention it because in the catalogue to this exhibition, the authors, they say that this exhibition is on the background of today's question of ecology, religious searching of meaning, and a banking system which is falling apart. So studying Steiner, this quoting from them, and they are not anthroposophists, Steiner's ideas are among the most exciting chapters in modern art and intellectual history. To take part in this leads way beyond art itself. And I have some other experiences, I think some of you also have, with mainstream exhibitions, publishers, magazines, television programs, which have a similar attitude. So today I don't anymore have the opinion that what I or we attempt to do is a counter movement. No. I feel the anthroposophical impulse is part of the main movement. It's a thin part, but it is a crucial part, and a part which only the anthroposophists actually deliver. And I've tried to show you in this one example. 100 years ago, he was rather the one who did it. And now I would say everybody finds something in this notion of the wall which is not the wall. And I would stop here now, but if we had another lecture, maybe in another 45 years, then there is another big chapter which I also find exclusively, more or less, by Steiner, which has to do with ecology, and not to look at ecology as a starving world and a disastrous thing, but something which has quite another quality. And I think that in 45 years, maybe, I wouldn't be surprised if this ideas by Steiner would be more apparent. But I have not said anything about that now. Thank you for your attention.